sons are now 3 and 5 years old, and they were robbed. They were robbed of the world's best mother.
Charles Johnson talking about his late wife, Kira, whose bladder was lacerated during a C-section delivery of their second child.
And for 10 hours, we continued to beg and plead for help. And for 10 hours, our pleas were ignored.
The Johnson story is just one of many heartbreaking tales from Californians who have been advocating for an update to the state's medical malpractice laws. This year, their wish came true as Governor Gavin Newsom signed off on a bill which raises the monetary caps on the amounts that victims of malpractice can receive. I spoke about this recently with Jamie Court, president of the group Consumer Watchdog, who began with some context.
It was because malpractice insurance premiums for doctors were going up, and they thought it was because of claims. We subsequently found out it was because insurance companies lost money in the stock market and had to raise their rates. But nonetheless, it resulted in what was the most stringent cap on medical malpractice victims. So if you're an injured medical malpractice victim and you go to court, your jury is only able to reward you with $250,000 for your lost quality of life, disability, what's called non-economic damages, your pain and suffering. And the worst part of that law in 1975 is it had no index for inflation. So the $250,000 cap in 1975 is $250,000 today. And as a result, we've had all sorts of problems with patients who've been injured and haven't been able to get attorneys because the most they can recover is $250,000. And from that $250,000 has to come your attorney's contingency fee and your expert witness costs. And it doesn't make economic sense for people to bring these cases. So we have a lot of injured patients who don't have any access to the justice system, even though they're legitimate victims of medical negligence. And this has been noticed by all sides, but it's been a deadlock in Sacramento. Yeah. And finally, we've broken the deadlock, and the governor has signed the law, signed it on the same desk that Jerry Brown signed the 1975 cap, and he has significantly increased that cap so that, and it'll go up over 10 years, but the end result is victims of medical negligence will be able to get attorneys and will be able to get more justice.
And I do want to talk a little bit about this particular legislation, but just to back up for a moment, for a while, as I understand it, it looked like this issue was potentially headed towards a ballot measure this fall. Why was it going in that direction, and why perhaps might that not have been the best strategy for changing the status quo?
Well, the ballot measure was the only thing that would have gotten the logjam to break, and was the only thing that got the medical insurance complex to the table. A board member of ours at Consumer Watchdog was one of the proponents of the ballot measure, and the ballot measure would have said that when you're catastrophically injured, permanently disabled, or die, you would have no cap. The jury would decide it. And that scared the doctors and the medical and malpractice insurers enough into this compromise. Absent that, there would have been no compromise. So it was necessary to do that.
Jamie, let's talk numbers and let's dive right into it. What are these new limits and when will they go into effect?
They go into effect starting next year, but they're graduated limits up to, if you're a victim of wrongful death, you can get up to $1 million in 10 years. And if you're a victim of personal injury, you can get up to $750,000 in 10 years. But the catch is there are 3 separate caps. So if a hospital participated in the injury, any institution, you can get a cap against the hospital. If a doctor was involved, you get a cap against the doctor. And if there's another provider who's not affiliated with the first 2 and they participated, you can get a 3rd cap. So most of these cases have 2 parties responsible: a hospital that's responsible for the residents and the nurses, and a doctor, and there's often these cascading errors. So for most people who file a malpractice case, next year it will go up to $1 million for wrongful death, or starts at $500,000 for one cap, or $350,000 if it's a personal injury, or $700,000 if it's a hospital and a doctor. So it goes up significantly enough that patients are going to be able to get attorneys, they're going to get access to justice. It's not everything, but it is a really big improvement.
Jamie, as you just mentioned, this isn't everything, and one of the things it's not is maybe, a different set of circumstances for those who are victims of malpractice in the past. Families like the Olsen family of Chula Vista. Their son Stephen was just 2 years old when he fell into the woods, and they went to the hospital. This family asked for a CT scan, but they were denied.
Medical experts testified at trial that if he'd gotten the scan we'd asked for on our first visit, he would still have his sight and be independent today.
Jamie Court, I know you know this family well and the situation well. This is a man who now will never be able to live on his own. How are you and others feeling about the fact that, as great as this might be for future families, this is not going to help families like the Olsens?
It's really tragic. It won't help families like the Olsens. But, Scott Olsen was the proponent of the initiative, the father of that son. The son is now 32 years old. He's blind. He's still got cerebral palsy. He'll never live on his own. The mom was on our board, Kathy. She died a couple of years ago. Scott had to quit his job to take care of the son. But the big tragedy was the jury awards $7 million for this kid's disability, for his blindness, for his lifetime of never being able to take care of himself, of never being able to live on his own. And when he left the room, the judge had to knock that award down to $250,000. And that money would have been really needed. So it is a sad story, but on the other hand, Scott was happy when we cut this deal. Scott was one of the only two people who could have released the ballot measure and withdrawn it from the ballot. And he was happy because he knows it's not going to happen to someone else. So it's been a long time. The family has come to terms with the law, but they are glad that no one else is going to have to go through what they had to go through.
And Jamie, clearly this might provide a lot of relief for victims and their families, but what about the perpetrators, the doctors, the hospitals? To put it in medical terms, in some ways this feels like treating the symptom as opposed to treating the disease. What do you think the next steps should be on that front?
Well, this is treating the disease, because when you get a case against a doctor, and the doctor has a case or more than one case against them because patients get access to the courts, those doctors tend to be on the blacklist by malpractice insurers. They tend to be pushed out by hospitals. The only way to get these doctors out of the game is if you, and there's only a small percentage that commit most of the malpractice. The only way to get them out of the game is when you hold them accountable. In fact, we did a study that found never events. These are events that shouldn't happen but for medical negligence. In the Medicaid system, add $1.2 billion to Medicaid every year. These are events like sponges left in you, things that should never happen. There's CPT codes, and we totaled them up, and it came up to $1.2 billion. There's a study that found states with caps have 15% more never events than states without caps because there's no deterrence. So if we can deter 15% of $1.2 billion, that's $257 million a year we're saving for the system. So there is an increasing recognition by the medical establishment that it is good to punish doctors who deserve it, because it's going to prevent them from causing injuries, from causing harm, and from causing additional medical costs.
Jamie Court, always a very busy guy. Always appreciate speaking with you. Thank you so much for making the time.